you don't know the thing, don't talk about the thing.
It's unfortunate. Let's talk about the African-American-Africans relationship. And I have heard you talk about the former President Barack Obama. You were asked a question, what you expected of him as a black president, and you said, you were asked about what you expect of, I think, a Donald Trump presidency, and you said you expect from Trump, I think, what people expected from Obama. Essentially, you were saying is going to be the same thing. I want to say that Africans expected a lot from the presidency of Barack Obama, being that he is a true descendant of Africa from Kenya. We expected a lot. Some of the things that you have mentioned here, we really thought, some of us who are in the diaspora and see what is going on back home, we thought Barack Obama was in the place to tear down some of these old practices and bring in a new spirit, inject a new spirit in leadership, in government, in democracy in Africa. Essentially, Barack Obama did nothing. Rather, he was trying to push a gay and lesbian agenda on Africa. I remember Hillary Clinton going to Uganda and telling Africans American aid is going to be henceforth tied to your acceptance of lesbianism and homosexualism. This is the problem we have. Africans feel like African Americans are not supporting these kind of transparent institutions in Africa. And the Obama example is a glaring example.
Well, Barack Obama is an anomaly because although he is biologically African, he is 100% psychologically a European. So I wouldn't call him an African, and I wouldn't call him an African American. He doesn't belong to either of us. He belongs to the United States government. Now, the question is not why Barack Obama betrayed African people. The question is, why did African people believe that Barack Obama signaled any change in policy towards Africa? See, that's the mistake that we're making. We keep letting white supremacy outthink us and out-strategize us. What proof did we have? What evidence did we have that suggested that Barack Obama was going to be anything new for black people? See, we have this mistake we make that a black face equals black power. And I'm here to tell you unequivocally, black power is not necessarily contained within a black person. In fact, is usually the opposite. The blacker the government, the more white the power behind it, because we do not finance our own campaigns. If you go to Africa and look at who's financing campaigns, if you go to the UK and look at who's financing black political campaigns, if you come to America and look at who finances campaigns, if you would have even looked at who financed Barack Obama, if you would have only looked at his major campaign contributors, you would have known from the beginning that Barack Obama is not being elected to bring about some African renaissance. As you've already stated, he was put in office for two reasons: to homosexualize black men in America in the interest of population control, and to go into Africa and make Africa safe, convenient, and comfortable for Western exploitation again, to make Africa safe for neocolonialism. And he achieved both goals. And Barack Obama achieved those goals more efficiently than George Bush, Bill Clinton, George Bush Sr., Jimmy Carter. And the reason he was so effective in Africa, and the reason he was so effective in Black America, is because we made the faulty political assumption that he was sent by God to save us. He was sent by the devil.
The triangle of the African political and development crisis. Take, for instance, you have today two major countries two major countries, the Chinese and the French, who are raping African resources. You mentioned about China. Do you know that China has police stations in some African countries? For example, South Africa. The Chinese have a police station in South Africa. I learned from you that they are teaching Mandarin in South African schools. That's a Chinese language in African schools. Now, another problem with the Chinese give loans to Africans, but it is on condition that I am giving you this loan to construct this piece of highway, but you know what? The equipment must come from China, the labor must come from China. So what they have given you, they have taken it back. With the other hand, how can Africa get rid of this kind of mentality? The French are there telling Africa you must serve in your reserves in France. And they pay taxes upon it. And they decide when to give back that money to Africa. I mean, how can Africa get loose from this mentality?
Here's one of the biggest mistakes that we make as African people. That situation is no different than it is for the electoral situation here in America with black politicians. It is no different. Our problem as a people, we have been conditioned by European propaganda to believe the best possible leadership that we could have is a leadership that was trained by the white man, that has a great relationship with the white man, that is receiving tutelage and financing from the white man, and who thinks, acts, and lives like the white man. The biggest problem in Africa, one of them, and in Black America, Black Europe, everywhere, we think that only the Black bourgeoisie can solve the problems of Africa. Nothing could be further from the truth. These Negroes shop in Europe. They have homes in Europe. They live in exclusive suburbs. They wear all European clothing. In many cases, their women look like white women, or they go out of their way to look like white women. They pray to a white Jesus. In other words, how can there be an African leader who imitates European leadership? African leadership must be original. African leadership must be authentic. And African leadership must come from the grassroots community. Whenever you show me an African head of state who has been trained by America's military or trained at a European university, I can almost guarantee you that they will be useless to the African independence movement. They will be useless because although the body is African, the face is African, the hair is African, the mindset is almost exclusively that of a European. They are European Africans, and we have to stop putting them in office because their job is not to serve Africa. It's to serve the European neo-colonial agenda.
I think
and if we keep on letting them Chinese, if we keep on letting them Chinese in Africa, I'm going to tell you right now what's going to happen. Within 50 years, I promise you this, if we keep on giving China everything it wants, and let us be clear, why is China in Africa? 4 reasons. 4 reasons. Number one, China is overpopulated. China has over 2 billion people, and it doesn't have space. China is always looking for new places where it can expel its useless residents to. So that's number one. They're looking for places to send their excess population because China is overcrowded. Number two, China is the Walmart of the planet Earth. China is the number one producer of cheap goods, cheap military weapons. So China is always looking for new markets where it can sell its excess junk. Africa is the perfect place for that because given the devaluation of African currency, our people on the continent can't necessarily afford the things that are being sold in Europe and America. So China can come with its knockoff versions of those same products and get rich off of everyday Africans. Number three, China wants to exploit African mineral resources. We obviously know that because China is in a Cold War with America. And number four, fourth and final, China needs a place where it can set up additional industries and pay people almost like slaves, like a slave labor wage. What better place to go than Africa, where many of our brothers and sisters are poor, are struggling. Many of our children go to bed without sufficient food. So you know if you open up businesses in Africa, you'll be able to get rich by paying Africans a very meager wage. To make a long story short, they are there to exploit. And within 50 years, I promise you, there's going to be a conflict between Africans on the ground, the grassroots, and the Chinese. And it's going to erupt into a civil war in Africa between the Chinese and the indigenous African population. And it may end badly for us because we do not have the military technology to take on China. But it's going to come to a cataclysmic confrontation because Black Africans are getting sick and tired of bourgeoisie African leadership selling out the country to the Chinese.
Now, you travel a lot to Africa. Do you meet African leaders? And when you meet them and you express these concerns, what are they telling you?
To make a long story short, what I hear from most of them, sometimes directly and sometimes indirectly,
with the colonialists, and he is doing extremely well. His country is doing extremely well. And I think he is indeed a good example of a developmental leader, void of a certain degree of democracy, which you were preaching here. And I'm talking about the president of Rwanda. That is a country that was a former French colony. When he took over after the war in Rwanda, he sent the French out, essentially, changed the system, turned it Anglo-Saxon, and you go to Rwanda today, you will not believe that is a country that was in severe war in which close to 1 million people died. Rwanda has become the center of technology in Africa. I think that is what you are saying. I think you are saying it is going to take men like such as what is his name again? Going off my mind. But it would take men like him to transform Africa, isn't it?
Absolutely. And here's another.
You may be seated. You carry Marcos.
Mistake we make as Africans globally. So as a Pan-Africanist, normally anything I say is applicable to us anywhere. We have to stop, and this is where our religious immaturity negatively affects our political progress. African people, all of us, most of us, we are religiously immature. And what I mean by that is we allow our religious beliefs to infect our political strategy. The reason why we don't have more Kwame Nkrumahs, the reason we don't have more Patrice Lumumba's, the reason we don't have more Robert Sobukwe and Sekou Touré's and Julius Nyere's and Didi Nkamathis, the reason we don't have more is because religion has taught us that leaders are chosen by God. You pray for your leaders. This is a big problem in Africa, African America, everywhere. We pray for leaders. Other races build leadership colleges and they train them. The Chinese train their leaders, they make them. The Europeans train their leaders, they make them. The French, the Arabs, they train their leaders, they make them. And the reason why we get one good leader or two good leaders every generation is because we don't have leadership schools. We don't have leadership institutes and universities. We are being influenced by Islam and Christianity to believe we got to pray and wait until God sends us a Messiah from heaven. That is a very immature position to take, but it is one that most African communities in the world have taken. We're waiting for God to drop a Jesus from heaven as opposed to building a Jesus from the ground up in our own schools and universities.
All right. That is interesting. Now, let us talk about, you talked about the African Union. The African Union essentially doesn't exist. It's a name on paper because these people, they don't have any power. There have been conflicts in Africa, and I spoke with you briefly about the conflict going on in the Cameroons. Today, it has been going on for 4 good years, and over 12,000 people have been killed, and over 100,000 in refugee camps in Nigeria, in Ghana, in Gabon, in Democratic Republic of the Congo. And you have over 800,000 internally displaced with over 400 communities razed down by government forces, government soldiers. This has been ongoing for 4 years and counting. And you would think that the African Union would as much as come in and say, let us understand what is going on. Let's have a hearing on what is going on. No, not even for a moment has the African Union weighed in to try to mediate peace. That is the problem with the African Union.
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. And the purpose of the African Union, going back to the dream of an Honorable Marcus Garvey, to a dream of an Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, the purpose of the African Union was to ultimately bring about a United States of Africa, where you have one military, one education system, one currency. However, as much as I love the idea of the United States of Africa, and as much as I believe that that is a solution for the African continent, at the same time, it could be a curse if you evolve into a United States of Africa where the member states are not sovereign and are still in debt to Britain and to the US and to the UK and to China. A United States of Africa only benefits a free Africa. A United States of Africa will never benefit an enslaved and colonialized Africa, because if that is the case, then the United States of Africa will only allow the European and Chinese neo-colonizers to more effectively control the continent. So until we are free, there need not be a United States of Africa, or it will simply be a weapon of the West.
I kind of rather think that a United States of Africa, it's not possible because of the influence of China, the French, the British, and the Americans. I think that is why you would not have a United States of America, because of the conflict of interest within these powers.
I agree with you. It is against their interests to allow such a thing. African unity is death to neocolonialism. As you said earlier, 75%, if not more, of the world's resources come from sub-Saharan Africa. 75% of the world's resources comes from sub-Saharan Africa. The United States of America, which is less than 5% of the entire world, consumes nearly 50% of the world's resources. In other words, America is the vampire of Africa. Yes, the UK, yes, China, but America in particular is the vampire of Africa. And Africa needs to evolve a new policy towards America. It has to. You cannot. Africa has a new word for neocolonialism, and it's called investment. The new word for neocolonialism in Africa is called investment, where we want to let white corporations come into Africa and steal the gold, steal the silver, steal the oil, steal the gas, steal the tea, the salt market. Anytime we want to let a new white person come in, or Chinese come into Africa and steal, we don't call it neocolonialism anymore. We call it investment. They are investing in Africa. They're not investing. They are stealing and neocolonializing. Listen to this. The average African government in most African nations doesn't own a bank that has a higher level of investment capital than the foreign banks that operate within that country. How can you be a sovereign nation and your money is printed by the same country that enslaved you and robbed you for the past 100 years? That is an absolute contradiction to say we are an independent nation, but my money is held in trust by France. My money is held in trust by Portugal. My money is held in trust by England and the United States. How are you sovereign when your colonizer prints your money, controls your money, and then determines how much of your own money you are allowed to have?
Well, but let us look at the large African American community in the U.S. You talk to many Africans, they will tell you they feel discriminated against by black Americans. I'm talking about those in America. You ask Africans in America, where do you find the most racism and discrimination? I bet you the majority will tell you they are segregated and discriminated most by black Americans, African Americans, than by the white Americans. So it appears it is not just an Obama thing, it is something that is ingrained in the larger population of the African American, their inability to welcome their own brothers from Africa.
Great point. First of all, I want to say that we have to be very careful of making sweeping generalizations because, number one, they're not true. And number two, they do not help us to forge a unified Pan-African front. I believe in one race, one people. You understand? One Africa. With that being said, I am quite certain that what you say is true, that there are Africans from the continent who come to America and may be mistreated by African Americans. But I can also tell you the reverse is also true. There are Africans in America who mistreat, ignore African Americans, and they will do that in deference to white people, that they will act like they don't even see other black people. My point is, it happens in both ways. I've been to Africa, and I've had to deal with chauvinism from African brothers and sisters. I've had to endure taunts. I don't talk about this, but I've went through these things, disrespectful comments. Why do I not bring it up? Why do I not discuss it? Because number one, 99% of all Africans I've ever met in the world, whether they be in North America, South America, the Caribbean, Europe, Asia, or Africa, they have always embraced me as their brother. Yes, there will always be coons. There's coons in Africa. There's coons in America. There's coons in the Caribbean. There's coons in Canada. Of course, there will be African Americans who don't accept Africans. Of course, there will be Africans who don't accept African Americans. But I'm not focused on that because I understand that the solution is for all of us to unite on the global level. Because if we don't learn how to work together as one family, we will die as a separated people. So that, and also let me clarify this. I believe consciousness seeks out consciousness of its own quality. I'm a Pan-Africanist, so I'm going to attract other Pan-Africanists. If I don't like continental Africans, then I'm going to attract continental Africans who don't like African Americans. So we need to also recognize when you find this continental African American tension, you're normally dealing with an African American coon and a continental African coon. Because as a Pan-Africanist who's traveled the world, 99% of our people will embrace us. I will not focus on that 1% of Negro coon who doesn't recognize that we must unify or die.
You talk about Pan-Africanism, and I'd like to know your vision of Pan-Africanism. What do you hope to achieve in your perspective of Pan-Africanism?
Great question. And of course, just yesterday, we celebrated the life and works of the great Pan-Africanist forefather from the Bahamas, Dr. Edward Wilmot Blyden, who, as you know, came to Liberia, became Secretary of State, one of the most prolific African scholars of all time, one of the most published and articulate of all time, one of our greatest educators of all time. Also this month, right now, Black August, from the 1st through the 31st, we commemorate the 100th anniversary, the centennial of the Most Honorable Marcus Garvey's International Convention of the African Peoples of the World that took place in New York City for 31 days and nights. And it was from that conference we get the red, black, and green Pan-African flag. Pan-Africanism can be summed up in 3 points. Number one, we are all family, and we identify as family first. You're not a Muslim who happens to be an African. You are African who happens to be a Muslim. You're not a Ghanaian who happens to be an African. You are African who happens to be a Ghanaian. The race is always first. And the reason we identify as being African first is because God chose your race. You chose your religion. You can change your nationality. You can change your language, but you African for the rest of your life. God made you an African. So nothing is more important. Not your religion, your culture, your language, your flag. Nothing supersedes the African family. That's number one. We identify as African family first. Hashtag AFF. Number two, what is to be done for African people must be done by African people. So there is no non-African membership. There is no non-African money in our revolutionary struggle. Because as the African proverb goes, the hand that pays is the hand that rules. And as you can see, after 60 years of neo-colonialist investment and loans in Africa, Africa worse now than it was on the eve of independence. So we don't want no white people in our movements or Chinese or Arabs or anybody else, and we don't want their money. Our victories are African victories, or they are not victories at all. Number three, as the mother continent goes, so goes all African people. One of the contradictions of the African American civil rights struggle, one of the contradictions of the African British civil rights struggle, in the African Canadian civil rights struggle, in the African French civil rights struggle, the French African civil rights struggle, is it wasn't tied up with the continental struggle for the liberation of Africa. As Africa goes, we all go. The whole diaspora is chained to the progress or death of the mother continent. A strong Africa means strong Black America. A strong Africa means a strong Black Europe. A strong Black Africa means a strong Black Caribbean. And a weak Black Africa means a weak Black America. And what we need to understand in the diaspora is we have a direct role to play in the liberation of the mother continent. There has been one strategy that has not been tried yet for the liberation of Africa and all of her scattered Black children. And that one strategy is a global Pan-African revolution. I'm not just talking about Africa. I'm not just talking about Black America. I'm not just talking about Central and South America or the Caribbean or the South Pacific Islands full of Africans. I'm saying all of us. All 2+ billion around the globe must rise up at once together to throw off the shackles of European colonialism and Chinese neocolonialism. We can do this. The world cannot stop the rush of 2 billion Africans at the same time, totally united without any tribal schisms or petty differences. Nothing can stop the African except the African himself.
We can do it, as you say, but one would like to ask, how are you, I mean, with such passion that we see in you for this, how are you doing this? Are you building some groups, some coalitions with which to achieve some of these things, or you just being vocal, hoping that somebody picks up the ideas and run with them?
Absolutely not. I'm a Pan-Africanist and a Garveyite, and I say that with pride. We believe in action. Our nationalism is an action-based nationalism. Right now, I'm in the process of renovating 2 beautiful schools in Wilmington, Delaware, which will be the first of several Frederick Douglass and Marcus Garvey academies, where we will teach African leadership. We will teach international relations, international affairs, global economics. We are training Black boys to be the Black African leaders that we need around the world. We will teach them white supremacy. They will learn how to speak African languages. They will understand military science. They will know why and how the European and Chinese came to control so much of the African continent. Again, as I said earlier, education and economics is the right foot and left foot of African liberation. And as a psychologist and an educator, it is my obligation to help reconstruct the African mind. Because if you do not have a psychological revolution, there will never be a military revolution. If you do not have a psychological revolution, there will never be a political revolution. If you do not have a psychological revolution, there will never be an educational one, a social one, a dietary one, a family one. Change the African mind first, or you change nothing else. You and I both know that there have been scores of African leaders who came into power, who took over from the European and became just like the European on top of their own people. So changing out white power for Black power doesn't liberate African people unless the Black power has an African consciousness. I'm beginning with the schools, but then we need the hospitals, we need the banks, we need the military systems, we need the farms, we need a global African movement that is based on independent institutions. Because only if you control the institution can you change the behavior. How did white people come into Africa and change the tongue of millions within 25 years? Change the tongue of tens of millions within 40 years? How can you change the tongue of an entire people in a few decades? Because you take over the institutions. You take over the means by which you get food, clothing, shelter, work. When you control the institutions that the people need, you can control how the people behave. And the reason we cannot make African people globally walk the Pan-African life and live the African cultural way is because we don't have what they need to survive. Once we start building and providing our people with what they need to survive, then everybody will become a Pan-African nationalist.
When you run an institution like yours in Africa to train African minds, potential African leaders, when you run such an institution in the USA, you know the difficulties of Africans, most African accessing it. What do you think? Don't you think you should get to Africa and put some of those institutions on the ground for the people to have access to those kind of institutions?
Absolutely. And there was a chance that the very first school was going to be in Africa. And the reason that the first school is not in Africa is for 2 reasons, and 2 reasons only. Number one, there were things that took place these past few years in my personal life that required me to stay close to home. Africa's home, stay close to this colonization, if you would. So that's one reason. Developments in my personal life that gave me obligations that required that I stay close to home. That's number one. And number 2, I practice traditional African spirituality. And in a divination that I had with my priest, I was told that my first school was to be near my quote unquote home in America, which it is, Wilmington, Delaware, only 30 minutes away from Philadelphia. So that is why the first school is here, because based on what I believe in, it is the Creator's design for the first school to be in America. But it is my wish that the second school will be in Africa. And we want the schools all over the world, not only in Africa, not only in North America, but all over the world. So if you were to ask me, what is my dream job? I'll tell you what my dream job is. And any African watching this broadcast, I want them to take it to their government and their head of state and their Secretary of Education. I would like to be Secretary of Education or Deputy Secretary of Education for an African nation. I would love to build my schools from the foundation and platform of being a part of a ministry of education for an African nation that is trying to reconstruct and revolutionize the way in which we train and prepare African children. I would love to relocate to Africa and be part of a ministry of education.
Would that be a voluntary position or a paid position?
It can be. They may have to take care of my expenses. I will not charge. Most people who know me know that when I